Hey everyone, today's episode is an interview with R. Eric Royce, designer of Spirit Island. I'm so thrilled that we got a chance to do this. I'm a huge fan of the game, and if you're listening to this as it came out, then you can go onto Kickstarter and check out the expansion, Jagged Earth, for Spirit Island. A whole bunch of new stuff. If you want to see a first look for some of that material, I have one up on YouTube. Thank you to Greater Than Games for sending me that stuff. I will put a link in the show notes. So with that, please enjoy this interview with R. Eric Royce. Spirit Island, like many people, I've been obsessing over it. This game inspires such a dedicated fan base. It has been like an explosive success. It has been one of the most talked about games. That actually kind of had a little bit of a slow burn, I felt like it really needed to get into people's hands, and then it just kind of snowballed into this massive popularity. You've become a rock star of the board game design world, so congratulations, man.
Thank you. I didn't realize I was quite that exalted, but I am very happy with how things have been going.
Exaltation is, I guess, a fairly relative thing, but if you're inspiring people to make all kinds of awesome custom boards, like I saw on Board Game Geek yesterday, and then sock puppets, some crazy people are making sock puppets for
those
their
are
reviews.
fantastic.
You know, people, so you're inspiring something out of people. Let's get kind of like a baseline for you to start out with. So just so I make sure that I'm referring to you right, and before we're getting into all of this direct Spirit Island-y goodness, do people call you Eric? Do they call you R? Is it E.R.R. Tolkien? Is it River Surges in Sunlight? What's your actual name? Because I've seen a lot of people struggle with that online.
People call me Eric. The initial R is there. If I'm filling things out casually, like on my convention badges, you'll usually see just Eric Royce, because that avoids the whole like, should I call you R conversation. But R stands for Robert, which is sort of a family name. You know, my dad's first name was Robert, his dad's first name was Robert, and so I like to keep the first initial in there as sort of I don't know, a family tie, give it respect, that kind of thing. Call me Eric, and that's most of what people call me. There are a couple lingering names, and my two kids call me Dad, but don't call me Dad.
I'll try not to. I can't imagine that'll slip out in the middle of this, but really, it would be an intense podcast. We'd have to work some things out at that point. How long have you been designing games, Eric?
A couple different answers to that question. At all, since I was a kid. I have memories of making sort of a simple roll and move board game when I was 6 or 7. I made up, toss the ball around, get points for doing certain things games when I was in kindergarten. I never really stopped. My focus shifted. Sometimes it was more RPGs, sometimes board games, sometimes video games. For a little while, live-action role-playing games. But I've always made games in one fashion or another. I shifted towards shooting for, like, someday I'm going to get some of my designs published. Was a conscious decision I made back in, sometime in the late 90s or early aughts. And sort of started working on things then. And then my first game, Fealty, was published in, I think, 2011.
What were some of the touchstone games for you? The games that like made a real big impact, whether it's video games, whether it's like mass market games that you were playing as a kid, or it could be hobby games, whatever it is, something that's like vivid memories that made you go like, oh man, I really dig this and would love to be making these things myself.
Oh, geez, I could probably spend an hour just talking about that. From when I was really young, what I'm going to call, let's skip that for a moment. But let's see, computer games, I remember Ultima 4 and the original Wizardry, where I spent countless hours on both of those. The original Dungeon board game, which I think was a TSR release, spent a lot of time with that too, a lot of quality time. There was a game for the 2E called Archon, which was sort of chess with battling. You broke out to this arena whenever you ended up fighting things. Later on, sort of moving more towards college and board games. Both Magic the Gathering and Robo Rally, who I'm not sure that I consciously realized they were the same designer at first. But for totally different reasons. I love the heck out of both of them. Magic the Gathering was always what I wanted trading cards to be. Some members of my family, sort of into baseball trading cards, and I always wanted to know, okay, great, but what game can you play with them? And they would always explain patiently that, no, these were about a game or about a sport.
And you're like, but there's all these great stats on them. Yes. Surely we can do something.
Yeah,
with
the Magic
this.
came out. It's like, yes, this is what I've been wanting. I didn't even have the words for it at the time. I will always have a soft spot for El Grande as sort of my gateway game into Euros, it was something I bought half as a joke, half not, for a friend. And we discovered that we loved it. There are two games which I'll cite, which are not often perhaps cited among sort of heavier gamers. One is when I was super young, there was a game called Cootie, which is about assembling a small plastic bug.
Yeah, I remember that game.
And it was the first game where I experienced the frustration of, I don't have any power. All I get to do is, you roll a die and you take the appropriate part and you put it on your bug. And if you already have that, then you don't get to do anything. And I remember, that frustration of, wait, all I need is a 6. All I need to do is roll a 6, and I have no agency whatsoever over whether I roll a 6. Right. And so that was, I'm not going to call it formative, but certainly informative. And Flux by Andrew by Looney Lads was also it was the first rules morphing game I ever played, far before playing Magic the Gathering. It is, in some ways, very much a see what happens game. Your amount of agency in that game is not super high. But at the same time, it was this small, self-contained game where the rules would skew all over the place, and I loved seeing that happen.
I can imagine from a game design perspective, being able to see the nature of the game fully evolve and be manipulated throughout the game that's got to be fascinating to see it unfold, and then begin experimenting with what do these layers look like as new things get added and removed. I've never really thought about Flux in that context, but now that I think about it, yeah, that's got to be an amazing just kind of microcosm of awesome layering rule system.
Yep, it's one of those things where if I think of my game, what I like in a game is sort of it's not a static thing. It changes over time. And at that point in my journey, it was the perfect thing. These days it's played out for me, but I will always remember it fondly for that reason.
Finish out this baseline here. Aside from board game design, aside from being a dad, which is like a full-time job in and of itself,
yep.
What are your other interests and pursuits? I heard you say earlier RPGs. I heard you say some live-action role-playing. What are the other things that you do as either creative outlets or just general interests that you like spending your time with?
I have always enjoyed programming and used to do it professionally. I stopped doing it a while ago, but I was a programmer for 30 years, started in 3rd grade, and it'll always be part of my psyche, part of my bones. On the gaming front, like you said, RPGs, I play a medium amount. I tend to GM more than I play, but I'll do both.
I like that there's a difference there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I totally get it, but it's one person's facilitating the game, the other people are actually getting to play it.
Well, yeah, but I really like it. Kind of just, I guess, has a bit of insight into one of my motivations for game design is that I really like, hey, I made a cool thing. You want to try it? And that applies to being a GM just as much as a board game designer. So,
yeah, totally.
Other things, I enjoy playing Dance Dance Revolution, though I don't get to as often as I would like these days. Ditto with rock climbing. I took up. I just started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu recently, and am maybe not laughably bad, but not very good at it yet. But it's a lot of fun.
You're not up to the Gracie brothers level yet.
No, so I'm. But it's a lot of fun. It's something new. I did a hard form Shotokan back in college, and so doing a grappling form is really interesting. I enjoy listening to music. I have dabbled in musical composition, and it's something I want to get back to one of these decades, but I don't have the time right now.
Are you a musician?
I played piano for 5 or 6 years when I was younger, and saxophone for a few years. I know enough music to know how little I know, I guess would be the best way to put it. But computers, kind of like Magic the Gathering, was like, this is what trading card games should be. Back in college, I was trying to do musical composition using a computer, and this was 1991. And you could do it, but it usually required like dedicated sound hardware and a bunch of other things. And what you got out of it was kind of synthesizer-y and bleepy. And I'm like, oh, geez. So like the first time I got my hands on GarageBand, I'm like, oh, hey, this is what I wanted like, 10, 15 years ago. Just the ability to go like, I have this tune in my head. I kind of want to put something else over it and with it, but I can't, like, I don't have the skills or the instruments to do that. What would this sound like? And now here's a piece of software which lets me do it quickly and easily without too much fuss.
Yeah, totally. You're a musician. If you're using some sort of device that you're putting skill and input into and receiving something out, that's music. Hey,
yeah, absolutely.
I call that a musician in my book.
Yep. So, loads of things. Like, there's way more to do in life than there is time.
For sure. All right, so back to that overnight success, or maybe not overnight success, but at least like year and a half success that was snowballing success out of Spirit Island. Mm-hmm. That I gotta imagine has opened up some opportunities for you, or maybe put you into a different light than you may have already been received as a game designer, or maybe even made you reassess some of like your own personal career goals, both with board game design and outside of it. How has the success of Spirit Island changed kind of your trajectory?
In the short term, what it's done is every other project of mine has been backburnered. Because it's like, we want to do an expansion for this. And I kind of knew what I wanted to be in the next expansion, and Greater Than Games was on board with it. And I looked at it and like, that's a lot of work. So I've been able to like bang out a couple of small, quick side projects and do some work on the other game, which I currently have signed, which will hopefully be coming out next year. But other than that, like normally I will, in a given year, like in, 2015 to 2016, even having a kid, I think I prototyped out and tried at least 3 or 4 new things and spitballed 10 times as many as that on paper. I haven't been doing nearly as much of that. Everything else is just ground to a halt as I sort of hyper-focus on the few things that really need my attention.
Right.
So that's sort of big number one. Number two is that I have found the internet way more distracting. When you have a creative project that you've poured your heart into for 5 years, and then people love it and like talking about how much they love it, it's awesome. Reading about people having a positive reaction to the game, seeing the amazingly cool creative things that people do with a game, be it, making their own spirits, or that awesome custom board, or the sock puppets. Whenever I see those, it just sends this thrill of hooray through me. And, especially right around when it was released, there were a lot of those coming out as people sort of were exposed to the game for the first time. And, that means, I had to institute a time limit for myself on like how often or how long I'm allowed to check Board Game Geek for, and then cut myself off to that. So I don't just like, sort of distracting the same way that Kickstarter is, because there's a lot of enthusiasm, and that's validating, intoxicating. Like, it's just awesome to see. So that's the second way. I'm sure that there will be. Third way is that many more people now write me asking like, "Hey, do you have any advice?" Or, "Hey, thing X, can you comment on it?" There's been an uptick. Uh-huh. There's been an uptick in that, and I'm guessing it will end up opening doors longer term, but I'm just not in a position to know yet because I haven't had time to work on anything else. So. It's that's more speculative, but I do know that when Fealty was published, even though Fealty was modestly well received but not a hit, that being able to say yes, I have a game published, and people going, oh yeah, I've heard of that, meant that there were people who would go, oh okay, like you clearly know how this rodeo is run, like you've done this before. I expect that will probably continue to be true and be more true.
Yep. One success leads to another, even if it's a moderate success. I know that's how the world of podcasting worked. I had to score one interview in order to be able to say, hey, I've interviewed board game designers, and that led to someone else, and that led to someone else. And breaking into that first little echelon of I am an interviewer was key. And from there, doors just keep on opening up. And So with Spirit Island specifically, I'm sure you've plumbed the depths of the history of Spirit Island's development, but, what really was the genesis of the game? Like when you were initially sitting down with it, where did the inspiration come from?
The inspiration, most of my games come from a combination of two of three things: a theme, a mechanic, or a vision of a moment of play. And sort of once I get a handle on two of those three things, then I can kind of triangulate and find a reasonable third and kind of start from there. In this case, it was a combination of a thematic moment was sort of the counter-colonization, the fighting off colonists came from, I was playing, I think it was Goa, but I'm not honestly sure. It was a game with a colonize action of some sort. And I'm like, the local indigenous people have been entirely abstracted out of this game. That's kind of rude. So, and that was, I mentioned it, everybody at the table reacted like you did, but then I circled back to it. I'm like, we should have more games which are about stopping colonialism. Or at the very least, a game like that would shine a spotlight on the sort of invisible prevalence of that theme. And because it's something which, anybody who's played a lot of Euros or strategy games is as soon as you mention it, they're like, yeah, there are a lot of those, but it's not necessarily something that people have consciously considered. And by reversing it, it makes people go, oh, and then they consciously consider it, and they're like, oh yeah, there are a lot of those. And as a pleasant side bonus, it's also a fresh theme. Then mechanically, I had been kicking around ideas for sort of an action programming-based co-op, which, because it was like hidden action programming, it would help ward off sort of quarterbacking alpha player type stuff. That did not end up surviving long. That dropped, I don't know, a year into testing. The action programming dropped like a month into testing, and the hidden power selection dropped about a year in. So it did not end up informing the final design terribly.
Hidden power selection? Yeah. What's going on here? Was it originally like a competitive game or something?
No, it was just that you weren't allowed to say what cards you were playing. You would select them secretly, and you could plan on the high level, but you couldn't. You could neither state what you were playing nor show it to other players to try and cut down on people, telling each other what to do. But it just proved really irritating because people would be like, wait, what elements do I have? Keep flipping over cards. Do I have enough energy to pay for everything? So it's just physically annoying. And so I'm like, well, let's just try it all face up. And it turned out it didn't actually increase quarterbacking. So it was fine.
Yeah, I think you made the right call there, Eric. That would have been a nightmare. And a lot of the fun in the game is just trying to decide what you can do in order to cooperatively interact. Like the synergy of the different spirits together, I think, is a key component to the success and what makes this game so incredibly special. And if you weren't able to plan on some of that stuff, then I don't think you would really latch on to it the way the fan base clearly has. Was there a transitional point as you were developing the game that it just kind of clicked that this was not just a perspective game or something, but this was really something special? Or did you kind of know that from the get-go?
There were two times. They were both relatively early on. The first was when I brought the first very crude prototype to convention. Not a gaming convention. It was a live-action role-playing convention. There's a local one called Intercom. And it's, it's like 200 people, 300 people, not that huge. But occasionally people will play board games out in the con suite, and so I brought a prototype and got a few people to test. And the reaction, I've tested a lot of prototypes with people, and I know people enjoy testing prototypes, especially if it's of friends. So I have this filter of okay, yes, they like it, they're enthusiastic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this has legs. Because, people tend to give more positive feedback for a game which is written by somebody they know. The level of enthusiasm was much higher in this case. People were literally dragging other people over to the table and saying, you need to try this when this game finishes up. It was visibly different. There was a level of intensity in the interest, which was different. So that was one inflection point. And then later was the first time that somebody who I had never met asked, some of my friends said, hey, can we print and play copies? I'm like, are you sure? This thing is a beast to print and play. There's a huge amount of stuff. They're like, yeah, we want to do it. So, okay, you can print them out. The first time I got a request from somebody I've never met through a friend saying, I tested this with a person I know. I would like to now do a print and play copy. And I'm like, you know how much paper is in this game, right? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, sure, go for it. Like the fact that it was sort of going semi-viral despite requiring on the order of like $30 to $40 worth of bits, unless you scrounge them for other games, and I don't know, like 50 pages worth of paper printouts, which you then cut up in various forms. I spent a lot of quality time with my paper cutter between 2012 and 2017, and it's so the fact that it was going sort of second order and beyond, despite the inconvenience of putting together a prototype copy, made me go, oh, this has really good prospects. So long, like once it's out there and people are actually playing it, it does. When it was sort of in the process of heading towards Kickstarter and heading towards market, my big concern was, how well will this do based purely on a description for people who've never actually sat down with a copy?
Totally.
Or for people learning from the rulebook instead of somebody who already knows it. Like those are key gate points which it didn't have to deal with nearly as much in most of the testing I saw.
When was this signed?
Let's see. I started design in 2012. It was signed in 2013, I think. Then the big push was in 2014, and Kickstarter was 2015. Is that right? Yeah, and then it was supposed to deliver 2016. Art took forever, so it delivered 2017, and now it's 2018. Yeah, that's right.
Before it was signed or anything, when you were initially just kind of getting it moving, did you have any temporary artwork or anything like that?
Art, like actual pieces of art for the cards or the spirits, no. I did have graphics. I had icons for certain things. And the elements in particular needed very distinct icons in order to make that work. For targeting powers, I had a bunch of icons because just putting all the targeting requirements in text proved to be a non-starter.
Right.
So, but in terms of my general rule of thumb is that games get better with iteration, and so anything which gets in the way of iteration needs to justify itself, and that most publishers are going to be, used to prototypes which don't have art. I rarely, if ever, bother with placeholder art for my prototypes.
Yeah, I get that, and it's something that I really hold on to, particularly with like Magic the Gathering. When I look at the history of Magic, when Richard Garfield was working with those prototypes, and you saw the placeholder art for Shivon Dragon and that kind of stuff, I always think back to that, and I think those are such magnificent artifacts of history.
Yes.
And these games that I play that I absolutely adore, including Spirit Island, they're such incredible visual games. And I know that in a lot of ways, designers are getting ahead of themselves if they contract professional artwork before they get a game signed. But I do know that in particularly visual games, some people have like a friend just, mop up some sketches or something. Sure. And I would have loved to see some of the original ideas that were back in the hand-cut paper days of Spirit Island.
No, none of those, I'm afraid. I always knew that I wanted it to be a gorgeous game. My previous game, Fealty, had been a very bare-bones game. It's sort of a lightly themed abstract. But Spirit Island just wanted a vivid, thematic treatment to it. So when I was looking around for a publisher, that was something I had strongly in mind. Like, I want a publisher that can do this game justice, because if it has all the mechanics going well but doesn't look good, then that's not so great.
It's not going to work for anyone.
Yep.
Maybe you already answered this a little bit when it comes to broader game design, but specifically the spirits, because to me, yes, the whole mechanism, the Rube Goldbergian mess that is Spirit Island, well, I shouldn't say mess, the Rube Goldbergian monstrosity, let's leave it at that is Spirit Island. It's awesome, but the spirits are really the thing that draws people in. And when it comes to those spirits, do you start with the theme, envisioning a particular type of spirit and then developing mechanics to match it, or are you actually trying to develop something mechanically, like some interesting way of playing, and then seeing what a suitable spirit theme would be for that? Or does it vary based off of whatever spirit you're working on?
It varies, and this is the exact right time to be answering this question, as I've just I'm in the later stages of doing all the design for the new expansion, and for the expansion, I think I spitballed like 3 to 4 times as many spirit concepts as actually ended up being finished, and easily, in terms of spirits which actually got like spirit panels and unique powers and were play tested at some point, or just by me, it's probably 2 to 3 times as many, and which made it to testing with other people at least once or twice, it's probably twice as many. So I've been doing a lot of spirit design over the last year, and it is more often start with the theme, but it's probably 2/3 theme, 1/3 mechanic. In both cases, whenever I start with one, I will then almost immediately ping pong to the other. Like, I'll do my initial thematic brainstorming. I'll go, okay, this is a spirit of I'll do one which is not in the expansion and is not likely to appear in any expansion because it doesn't match the terrain. But okay, this is an ice spirit. There is not really any ice on Spirit Island other than the high ridge where there's an ancient curse from which river surges and sunlight comes. So if there's an ice spirit, what are things associated with ice? Okay, cold. What is cold associated with? Okay, slowness, freezing, maybe death, preservation, perhaps. Freezing over water. Start going over thematic associations. Then once I have a big list of thematic associations, I'll go, okay, how can I represent these mechanically? And then I go, okay, spitball on, come a brainstorm on mechanical ways to represent those. I'm like, okay, now that I have these, could any of these condense? Can one of these represent some of these? What else would these represent thematically? Does that work well for the spirit? Like, does this mechanic imply things about the spirit that are false, or which wouldn't work well? Oh, and sometimes that will lead to exploration, like, oh, this spirit could have another aspect of X, because all these mechanics which work well for its core theme kind of reverberate into this other thing as well. Okay, that's kind of interesting, so let's try exploring in that direction. So it will do both of those things. So it's really a blended process back and forth through the two, and any given spirit will echo back and forth multiple times, even just during early brainstorm design, even before I ever start doing notional powers or spirit panel.
Well, of the original 12 spirits that have been released between the base game, the promos, Branch and Claw had 2 spirits.
Yep.
How many would you say were left on the cutting room floor? Like, legitimate, not just hypothetical spirits, but ones that you were trying to make work?
Oh, for the original release? Oh, geez. Bare minimum of 6 or 7.
Oh, man. Those are more artifacts, sweet artifacts. Did any of them end up getting repurposed for this expansion that you're working on?
Portions ended up here and there. There's also actually a number of them have references. And I don't think I've ever come out and said this online or on a podcast before. I've mentioned they have references, but not where. If you look at one of the scenarios in Branch and Claw, the one where you're seeking out things of power, many of those, 6 or 7 of those, are nods to spirit concepts from the prototype days, which didn't make it in for some reason or another.
Oh, that's awesome.
But many of them, it's hard to answer because in some cases, pieces of concepts turned into other things. Like there was one deep heart of the island, and portions of that sort of worked their way into serpents slumbering beneath the island, but then other parts didn't. It's also hard to say because there were so many iterations of the core underlying rules system. There were spirits which I made early on, which if I showed them to you now, you'd be like, wait, that doesn't work with things how they work now. There's an entire era of like 2 to 3 years worth of Spirit Island dev where any spirit I showed you from those years wouldn't have growth options because growth didn't exist yet. And there was only one presence track, not 2. So you'd look at them and you'd be like, okay. Oh, and there'd be a sacred site track. And a whole bunch of other things where it's like, okay, does this count as something which could have been published? No, because it was an artifact of a previous bygone era. So yeah, there are a lot of those.
What you're telling me is that this ice spirit, there's still time in some way, shape, or another for it to make its way back, because you're just going force away for an awesome ice spirit to be in there. I mean, come on, a broken glacier maybe just made its way over there. I'm coming from Alaska. I got to represent the cold, and I got to have something going on that's feeling nice and chilly on the Spirit Island. Was there any particular spirit that you felt really bad about cutting? Like, was there one that you just really wanted to make work? You were like, oh, this one's so cool, but it just doesn't fit within the structure of the game, or you couldn't really hammer out the issues that were preventing it from really being balanced with the rest of the spirits? Anything like that?
Here and there, probably, although the well of the 5-year development cycle for Spirit Island is very deep and includes the birth of both of my children. So portions of it are hazy. So there were 2 more spirits which had been tested, which did not end up making it the stretch goals for the original core game Kickstarter. We just barely made it to getting Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves and Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds. There were then another 2 spirits which could have gone in, but the original Kickstarter did not quite make them. As it turns out, in hindsight, at the time I was like, well, that's too bad, because I liked both of them. But in hindsight, I'm really glad they didn't make it in, because one of the 2 I revisited, and I feel like it's way, way better now. The other of the 2 I revisited, and I feel like it is noticeably better, but not to the same, like, it doesn't have the same drastic level. It has notable changes. One of the other 2 actually got split into 2 completely different spirits. My conclusion was, this is cool, but sort of the Ted, who's a local friend and playtester who has done more development work on Spirit Island than just about anybody, has said, I think there's too much going on with this spirit. It has a lot of cool things happening, but it has so many cool things happening that you can't really pay attention to all of them. And that means that they're all kind of under-supported. And I'm like, now that I've had like a month or 2 to think about it, because the pressure is off to iterations out, I think he's right. And so for this upcoming expansion, there are 2 spirits, one of which we have seen. It was revealed at Gen Con, Vengeance as a Burning Plague, and a sort of disease-centric spirit and then the other half of the spirit was split out into something else, which we have not yet seen.
That's cool. So let's actually turn to the expansion itself. I mean,
sure.
This thing, I don't think I've ever seen a community so rabid for more content for a game than this moment right now for people excited about more Spirit Island stuff. First off, how does that pressure make you feel?
Flattered, honored, tremendously happy. There's a lot more work I want to do. Like, I love making spirits. It's a lot of fun. The sort of the market demands of getting things done on time is a time pressure, which is stressful, because, like I said, there's been a lot of work over the last year. But that's just a matter of getting it done in a fashion such that so as not to disappoint people. Because I knew there'd be a long lead time for art. People online are like, 18 months for delivery from Kickstarter. How are we going to wait that long? And it's like, okay, well, since I knew that there was going to be a long lag between Kickstarter and delivery, I wanted to get the design work to the point where we could start commissioning art as soon as possible, and that has involved a lot of pushing, thus dropping most of my other projects for the nonce.
Right.
But other than the time pressure, it's generally been great. It is weird. It's the first time I've ever sat down to do design work and been like, I know that this game which I'm working on is going to go in front of players and be sold. All other times, it's like, I'm working on something and I can this, that, the other thing I'm exploring, and then I'll pitch it to a publisher and maybe it'll get published, maybe it won't. Here it's like, it's going to go out there, and that took a little bit of getting used to, but once I did, now I'm great. It's fun. I throw the new spirits in front of people, and they're like, "Oh, this was fantastic! Totally my cup of tea." And I'm like, "Yes."
That's got to be a good feeling, man.
Oh, it's fantastic.
What were your design goals for this expansion?
Primary goal was mostly just more content. Tom Lehman did a article once on expansions. I think it was Tom Lehman. If not, then I apologize for misattributing it. But and it said, like, sort of the ideal first expansion doesn't change the rules of the game too much. It just adds more content.
Mm-hmm.
Branch and Claw did not follow that convention because Branch and Claw was originally designed as part of the core game. And it got split out late in the design process. And as a result, it has it has a fairly substantial rules load, which is not part of the core game. It's not just here's some more stuff. My goal for this expansion was to have a lot more content, which it's kind of unavoidable to have a little bit more rules load because I'll be like, oh, I want this power to do thing X. Well, that creates question Y, which means I should, rather than making people guess how it works, I should just put it in the rules. So, there are rules about how things work, and there's some new things. There is, one thing I could say, like, there's a new keyword effect, isolate, which prevents explore in a land. That's something which it's something I've wanted for a while. It also can prevent adjacencies if you don't like the adjacencies. It's not a powered effect. It's mostly on minor powers, and it's kind of speculative because you don't know where the invaders are going to explore. But it's like, okay, yeah, that's technically, it's a rules addition, but it's not like a structure change. It's not this, huge different thing. So mostly I just wanted to make more stuff for people to enjoy, including some just, I don't know, new ways to do things. Mostly it's sort of like explore the content in the world and see what I find. Is really what it is. Right. There's something called aspects, which the Kickstarter will be talking about right off the bat, which are new ways to play one of the 4 low complexity spirits from the base game, where you take an aspect for them, which might say, okay, lightning, swift strike, instead of its, sky shot with fire and darkness is a new innate power that replaces thundering destruction.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
Yep, and instead of destroying towns now with its innate power, it does fear and adds strife. It's less about the kaboom lightning strike and more about the thunder and the fear. And it doesn't. It's not a radical change. You're still using the same growth options and presence and special rules and unique power cards, but it does shift up what you're doing with the spirit. It changes how the board progresses. And similarly, some of the aspects might change out a special rule for another special rule, or a special rule for so you have no special rules, but you have 2 innate powers instead of 1, or vice versa. So it's sort of a way that people can revisit those spirits and enjoy them.
What's your favorite aspect of the expansion?
That's a hard one. They're still in flux at this time. A couple of them are fairly stable. Probably the one I just mentioned, Sky Shot with Fire and Darkness.
Well, tell me this. What spirit is going to make the best sock puppet? Because they're coming. They're coming. I've already conscripted my friends, and I'm like, yo, dogs, it doesn't matter whether this is for some pre-release content or whether it's us getting together after this thing's done. Yep. We live in Southeast Alaska, the best place to shoot any sort of nature photography in any sort of climate. So we are going to have to get our spirit sock puppet game on and step it up for these things.
2 of the ones shown at Gen Con will actually, the 2 shown at Gen Con, Vengeance is a Burning Plague and Grinning Trickster Stirs Up Trouble, will probably be up there, especially Vengeance is a Burning Plague. That one ought to be fun. The others I'm not. So the art for spirits is still in process. Like I've seen sketches for a few of them, but it is happening right now. So I don't know exactly how they're all going to come out looking yet.
Do you have any input on how these spirits are supposed to look or what you envision them as, and they bounce it off of you?
Yep. And sometimes I have very strong ideas, and sometimes my ideas are very nebulous. Sometimes I have firm opinions. Other times it's like, well, let's explore in this direction and see how it goes. Or I'll toss out like, here are 3 or 4 things that could work, and Jen from Greater Than Games will be like, oh, let's run with this one. Because she also knows who the artist is for that particular spirit and what their strengths are and that kind of thing. So
what was the hardest thing about designing this expansion?
One was organization. There's so much content that and the base game of Spirit Island had sort of 2 big pushes where it got huge amounts of playtesting. One was when Greater Than Games first released it to their playtesters. And then there was another big push right after the Kickstarter finished between the Kickstarter and sort of finalizing all of the files. And in both cases, that basically ate 3 months, where it was like, okay, I'm just spending 3 months doing nothing but Spirit Island. My wife is tremendously awesome for putting up with me during that time. And I knew, like, that's not going to be sustainable for working on the expansion. I need another way. But the expansion has enough content. Like, it has content to rival the base game.
Wow.
We're talking 8 spirits versus 8 spirits. Probably 2 adversaries versus 3, but as many scenarios, and it has aspects in the base game didn't. It comes with event cards in the base game didn't. Probably not quite as many fear cards, but it'll have some. It'll have way more blight cards in the base. It's not quite as much plastic and wood, which is good because otherwise it would cost as much as the base game. But in terms of what you're getting in terms of gameplay, it's as much as the base game or more. And of course it combines with the base game, so it's combinatoric. And especially because also we're including rules for how to combine adversaries, so you can be like, well, what if the royal family of Brandenburg, Prussia married into England or Sweden or one of the other adversaries?
You are just like like a mad genius hanging out, being like, let's just throw this at them. Let's throw this at them. Oh, what if we combine this all? Like this, yeah. The overall aesthetic of playing Spirit Island. I'm not talking about like the visual aesthetic. I'm not talking about the specific mechanical, but the experience of Spirit Island is so empowering, and I find that part of the nature of the game itself. It's not just empowering in how you develop your spirit or how you move across the island or how you react to things. It's that you as the designer and all the other people involved in this game have given so many tools to play around with and tweak and add and remove that you're almost setting up like a lifestyle game instead of a just box game that you occasionally break out. I mean, I do that. I have other games on my shelf, but there is so much content in Spirit Island. It is preposterous how much awesome stuff that you have in there. And the amazing thing about it, and this is why I wanted to go back when I said Rube Goldbergian mess, is that it's not a mess, and it's unbelievable how cohesively they fit together. And that sounds like exactly what you're doing with this expansion. I mean, having the adversaries married together, like, dude, come on, that's bananas.
The funny thing about combining adversaries is, I approached it with some trepidation. I'm like, all right, I asked Ted and Rebecca. I mentioned Ted earlier as sort of, head developer, and Rebecca's his wife, and they have played many more games of Spirit Island than I have, which is saying something. And I'm like, okay, can you do this for me? Can you start testing adversaries together? I know this sounds bonkers bananas, but I'd really like to do it because part of the problem is, like, okay, we're going to release new adversaries. There are going to be players who want to play on like difficulty 8 or 9. But if you do that, you have to jump into the new adversary, a high level, and you're suddenly like, okay, we need to keep track of like 5, well, maybe not 5, but like 3 to 4 different rules which are now being applied to the game. And it's a lot easier when you can kind of go through the levels from the bottom up and sort of learn them as you go and stack them one on another. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, it'd be really nice if you could combine a lower level of this new adversary with an adversary you're more familiar with, especially one like Brandenburg, Prussia, which, there's no rules load at all. And they came back and they said, Eric, you're not going to believe this, but it looks like the difficulty is roughly additive. Like we worked at like X and Y, and you add the two difficulties together, and it's about right most of the time. So there, I mostly just lucked out. Like that wasn't specifically a design objective. That was just serendipity. So the fact that it's that simple is really good. Another thing I'm looking into is rules for adding an extra island board to increase difficulty because you have more territory to defend with the same number of spirits. Or
adding a wandering glacier. I'm telling you.
That one has proven far less tractable. That is far more intricate in terms of how you need to set it up in order to get a roughly constant difficulty boost out of it, because it doesn't scale at all with the number of players. But yeah, I enjoy making these things. I always feel like a fine-tuning difficulty, the ability to fine-tune difficulty is a virtue in a co-op, and being able to tie it into thematic stuff is really good. So jumping back, huge amount of content. The challenge was that if I'm not doing it full-time, previously all the playtesting stuff was being done either via emails to me or on forums. And that works fine when I have all this stuff loaded into my brain all the time. It doesn't work at all well when I might have to like take a week or two and not think about Spirit Island at all and then come back to it. Or I'm focusing on spirits for the next month and a half, and now people are testing aspects this entire time, and there's all this queued up feedback on aspects. So I ended up building out sort of a website using a tool a friend of mine has written where playtesters can submit their feedback and tag it to the various things which it's relevant to. So when I'm like, okay, I'm revising this adversary, I can go and I can click, and I can immediately see, here's the feedback from the last 3 months about this adversary. And I can go through and like, think about it all and reload it. But that required building, and it requires a very different workflow pattern than I used previously. So just managing all this stuff. The first spirits, which I had people testing, went into, I think I brought them to BGGCon last November, but then other things only entered testing this last July. Like, it took that long to actually get all the content actually made. It was being worked on before that, but the playtest kit was not like 100% complete until, this, like, around, roughly around, like, the summer solstice, I think.
Totally. Well, do you feel like at this point you're working on an expansion of Spirit Island, and it's probably not going to be releasing until sometime next year when it's going to get into people's hands? So you're looking at, what was it, 2012 until 2019, so 7 years of Spirit Island development. Are you going to set it aside for a while and be like, okay, I just delivered you a massive expansion, I'm taking a break from this thing and I'm going to be focusing on other game designs for a while? Or do you have a lot of ideas that you're really excited to get cooking on when it comes to more Spirit Island stuff beyond this?
So between 2015, after I sort of handed over final file set, after the Kickstarter wrapped up in September of 2014, our second kid was born in January of 2015. So in late December, early December 31st, I'm like, okay, here are final files because I'm about to vanish off the map for a while. And during 2015 and 2016, there was occasional playing around with Spirit Island stuff. There was a little bit of stuff which happened just before proofing happened and it went to the printers. But mostly I took a break and was working on other things. I found that after like a 4 to 5 month break, I was totally raring to get back into it. I may do something likewise here. Testing will not stop with the Kickstarter. Like at the end of the Kickstarter, we'll probably transition over to like balance tuning, where it's like, okay, the dynamics for everything are locked down, but we still need to calibrate difficulty levels and that kind of thing. And I also would, depending on how the Kickstarter does, as sort of a gauge for expansions beyond this one, I have some ideas for the next up expansion, which are going to require a lot more experimentation. Like here, I know the only thing which is really experimental in this expansion were the 2 new token types, of which only one ended up panning out, and the aspects. Like, those are totally new things. Everything else is, there's new stuff, but it's the same type of thing. It's not changing the structure.
I definitely welcome new stuff, but I also like my Spirit Island weird. I loved that branching claw. I know some people more prefer the less random nature of not having event cards or, some of the token stuff, though it seems like the majority of people, myself included, really, really love branching claw. And I like my Spirit Island weird and super creative. And what I know is that even if you're just giving us more adversaries, more spirits, more different power cards, more events, more blight cards, all that stuff is individually creative on its own. And I'm amazed by the sheer amount of creativity. I mean, I keep on using that word, but there's not really any better way to put it than some of these things and how they have so much thematic resonance in all the mechanical actions. It's really an incredible thing. If you stop designing from this point forward, you would still go down as a legendary designer for what I think is going to be a game that people are talking about 10 years down the road. This is really something special, and I'm looking forward to this expansion a lot.
I hope so. Thank you.
So I want to kind of wrap up here, because I could talk to you forever about just all the different things that inspire you, all the different things that you find challenging and how you confront those challenges. But maybe we'll save that for a time where we can more openly talk about the nitty gritty of these individual spirits on a future podcast. So let's end it with something fun. Of all the spirits on the island, which is the one that you would most want to hang out with? Personally, I'd have to go with Shadows Flicker Like Flame. That dude seems like he knows how to party. He seems pretty chill at the same time. The sock puppet has become like my sidekick in so many things. He's my homie.
So it would probably depend on my mood. If I was feeling sort of in an everyday mood, I'd say probably River Surges and Sunlight. If I was feeling particularly chill, then Vital Strength of the Earth. They are both spirits well accustomed to, being with people and people doing the people thing, and that's okay. Shadows I'd probably be kind of terrified of, as long as it didn't end up, dragging me off into some other space, then I'd probably be fine with that. Spread of Rampant Green could be fun in a particularly active mood.
Yeah. Well, Shadows I view as like the Trent Reznor of the island. I think he'd be pretty cool. And then there's some of the spirits. Actually, in the right context, Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares. As long as it's not coming there to scare the pants off of you, would be actually fantastic to hang out with, again, in the right context. That's awesome. Well, you've made a heck of a game, man. Are there any other projects or anything that you want people to stay paying attention to, looking forward to check out in the future, aside from the Kickstarter campaign, which, if you're listening, is up right now for the Spirit Island expansion, which the name of that expansion is?
Jagged Earth.
Jagged Earth. All right, you heard it here. Everyone should check that out. Anything else you want people to check out, Eric?
There's one other thing. I have another co-op coming out. It's a real-time dexterity card-playing, block-stacking co-op.
I love everything you just said.
Which is being published through Grey Fox Games. It is coming out sometime next year. I'm not sure exactly what the Kickstarter plans are. I think maybe winter, but I'm not positive. It's called Science or Die. You're a team of scientists attempting to cure deadly diseases, and it's a somewhat, as you can tell by the title, a somewhat more tongue-in-cheek take on the genre than something like Pandemic might be. And you are also, when I say curing diseases, you are literally building cures, which in the abstract represent molecules, in real time with physical wooden blocks. And unlike most such games where you're trying to do any sort of block building, what you have to build is something which you have decided by jointly playing these cards together. So if there's something that's just impossible to build, you have nobody to blame but yourself.
Sounds a little bit better than building cooties.
Yes, very much so. So yeah, but that's coming out. And in general, if I do keep a mailing list. So if anybody wants to know, when I have a new game coming out, it's very low bandwidth. They can just go onto Board Game Geek. I'm Darker on Board Game Geek. Send me a geek mail with your email address. I'm happy to put you on it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you for listening to the Cardboard Herald. As always, everything we do is ad-free and audience-supported. If you'd like to help keep it that way, find the Patreon link at the top of our webpage, cardboardherald.com. We have several levels of support with various rewards. If you enjoyed the show, we do a whole bunch of other stuff, including reviews, interviews, and recommendations across writing, podcasts, and video. You can find that on our YouTube channel or by visiting any of our social media or our website. So with that out of the way, thank you again for listening to the Cardboard Herald.